Hello. So, gonna get a couple of things out of the way real quick before we launch into this. First off, why am I making this video? We're gonna get to that. Second off, yes, this is probably gonna put me on a bunch of hit lists, but that's okay. I'm a veteran, and I've already said a bunch of things that are probably gonna put me on a list anyway, so I don't give a fuck. Thirdly, I'm not going to do the traditional YouTube thing and say I'm not encouraging or discouraging or telling you should or should not. I'm just simply stating some facts, and you go ahead and do what you want with that information. That's the closest to a YouTube safety net concept that I'm going to get out. So, let's get into what I'm talking about, what I'm hopefully enlightening to everybody, and go from there. So, I'm going to start with a couple of things that are all going to get mixed in together. How this all came about was that I was watching Napoleon the other day, the movie with Joaquin Phoenix. And I'm not really much of a Napoleon guy. I'm a bit of a history buff, nerd, whatever you want to say. And I know a bit about him, probably a little bit more than a lot of other people. But I just wanted to see the movie because it looked interesting, and I think Joaquin Phoenix is a good actor. And it was nice. And when I'm watching that, I was captivated at how they chose to start basically not in his beginning, but what his greatness, like his start of his actual greatness, because he capitalized on opportunity. That opportunity, for those who don't know, was the French Revolution. All right. We like to give a lot of shit to France, mostly from outdated mentalities of World War II and all that shit. We forget how much sacrifice they made during the Revolution, during World War I, and even the things that they had to do with their resistance in World War II. They have been a very active and loyal, I guess, country for a very long time. And I say loyal because I know that there's some dissident stuff that's going on with France now. Or at least at the time of recording, it's kind of hush hush here over in America. But when it was going on months ago, or talked about months ago, I'm sure it's still happening. But we look at it from across the pond, right? And we're just like, oh man, that's so crazy that they're clashing with their government like that. I'm like, is it? Do you guys know anything about France? Do you guys know anything about basic history? So, I'm watching a man look at an opportunity. And through a couple of victories, but obviously one decisive victory, is what earned him his place. So when the revolution ended, he was of relevance. And then that relevance made him prominent. And that prominent made him great. I guess one thing that leads me to always see why, he has such a draw is through a Friedrich Nietzsche kind of quote. He was a old world mentality that had been building for centuries. He wasn't supposed to exist. He was kind of a man out of time, but when he came, he conquered, similar to Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, things of that nature. Obviously paraphrase the fuck out of that quote, because as soon as I tried to recall it, I fucking forgot it, right? That's always how it works. But Friedrich Nietzsche had a very, I guess, love affair of Napoleon, which is hilarious because he was already dead for decades, if not a century, by the time, no. Probably about 30, 40 years, by the time that Nietzsche had started writing all of his stuff. So it just goes to show you the prominence that he had even after his death, right? When I was watching this movie and I was thinking about the revolution, I was thinking about a couple of other weird things. The first immediate thing after when I saw the revolutionary part and going through Napoleon's, rise to fame, basically, was the whole meme about men always think about the fall of Rome. I don't know where the fuck that came from. I'm not on TikTok. I watched maybe a YouTube video that kind of talked briefly about it. But I don't really know or understand the concept of it. I just know that it's a meme, and that for a while it was always this thing. It's like, hey, like, what are you thinking about, babe? Oh, the fall of Roman Empire. Like, why are you thinking about the fall of a great civilization? Why are you not thinking instead of how do you preserve a great nation? or a great civilization or a great society. And that's where I think a lot of people need to start looking to the French Revolution and perhaps France in general, and perhaps get a little bit of motivation and inspiration as to the literal way to clean house. Instead of thinking about, oh, well, how did this sickly, decaying empire end up falling and become a race to time, or, in some best cases, just a mere shadow of his former self. Well, it's because what Friedrich Nietzsche had talked about was there are only two kinds of people. There are servants and commanders. Perhaps slaves and commanders. I can't remember. I know it was an S word, but servants and commanders we'll say, because of course you can't say the other word without some already negative connotation. There's always going to be more servants than there are going to be commanders. And having been a lower enlisted in the military before, I definitely get that concept. I've lived it. However brief the time was my service, my time in service was, I still get it. And by no means do I think I have potential to be a commander in a military sense. We may touch on that in a little bit, though, outside of my military context. So if you always have more servants over commanders, then those commanders really better have a good fucking knowledge of how to keep them, serving, right? You had kings, you had emperors, you had people who worshipped as deities and gods back in the day. So clearly something was working for a long, long period of time in human history, because fiefdoms were the norm for centuries after we discovered civilization and made us all work together in these agricultural communities to eventually become society as we know it. Yet, it seems like today there is a rise of commanders, and we can look at America's government, for example, right? We used to have just so little of a populace that we needed so many representatives in the House. But we made it pretty fair across the Senate. It's two for everybody. And then, our three branches of government always seem to have just the right amount of speakers to represent the whole. As the nation grew and became what it is today, you think that, we would keep that mentality, or we would grow with that mentality. It doesn't really matter, because the thing at the end of the day is that we ended up having a lot more servants in office than commanders in office. And I'm not talking in a traditional sense of our commander-in-chief. I'm talking in a literal sense. These government employees on a local, state, and federal level are all servants to somebody or something, for those conspiracy theorists. But it's definitely not of their constituents. We address them as public servants as the overall catch-all term, but it's not the public that they serve. And it hasn't been for a long time. Probably, if I'm telling you this is not anything new to you. And you're probably wondering, okay, well, what do I do? That's a great fucking question. What are you willing to do? And think about that. Mull it over, right? I know what I'm willing to do. I know what I'm capable of doing. And through my experiences, through the life that I've had, I recognize my role, and bear with me here, right? I realize my role was never as a servant. And I may not be a traditional commander in a military sense or in a governance kind of mentality, because I act. And you're probably like, well, I've never fucking heard of you and you're a nobody, so we'll get there. Give me a fucking second, all right? We'll get there. But one of the things that I prize most about my time in the military is learning the real reason why we are different from people out in the world, civilians, is because we're taught to act. And it may not always be the right action, but at least we do something. And I think about the massive, and I mean fucking massive, surveillance state that we are in, where anytime you see something going on, you see a robbery, you see an injury, you see a fucking, a mob, you pull out your phone and you go ahead and you just record it. And some in the higher offices may think you are doing your duty as a concerned citizen, spreading awareness to these unrowdy, unsavory types of people, or all the crime that happens, or all the homelessness that happens. I'm from Chicago. I know firsthand all of the fucking crime, all of the fucking homeless, all of the corruption that goes on. I don't need evidence. I've witnessed it. I've experienced it. I've been on the other end of part of it. So, what I would like is not a surveillance state of concerned citizens to pull out their phone and foot the bill to somebody else, kick the can down the street so our governance can take care of the problem, because you're basically passing a buck to someone who's going to take that buck, double it, and then not give it back. That's the whole problem, right? Because we're not acting. We are not doing an action. We are taking a passive approach. We are becoming more servant-based. We are losing our commanders. And that's why Napoleon, when he came, he saw he conquered. I love using a fucking Caesar quote for a man who emulated him so perfectly decades, centuries later. He blew up in every way, shape, or form that was possible. He was like a modern fucking celebrity today. But he was good at what he did, too. And he may have had a bit of a god complex and ego and all that shit. I kind of don't see that as a problem anymore the older I get. Perhaps this is my, you either live long enough to see yourself become the villain or you die a hero kind of mentality. And I'm definitely past the point of dying as a hero. Way closer to a villain, for sure. And I'm sure all the Fed boys watching this are going to go ahead and misconstrue that all they want. But I'm at that point in my life now where it's like, all right, well, we've lost so much. We have given so much, and we do not receive. We don't have commanders who are commanding control over this country. We have servants who are propagating and making us more subservient. It's almost like we've lost commanders in general. We have servants and slaves. And if you're not in political office, you're definitely a slave. If you're not in some sort of big, rich, fancy club, if you're not some high status celebrity, and you're just a slave. Well, slaves have revolted countless times throughout the millennia, right? So what else is it going to take for us to do that? I know I'm getting to that point pretty fucking quickly. And again, I have to word myself fucking all politically correct. I want someone with a bigger pair of balls than me to just outright fucking say what we're all saying. And I'm going to say it, but I still have to say it a little delicately, put everybody at ease and, make sure that I'm only watched and not my window getting kicked in a second. We are still at a point where we can resolve things peaceably. As with all things, we are not savages. We have, kind of grown as a society over the last 1,000 years, over the last 100 years even. And I would like to think through all the progressive things that we've been doing, we're showing that we are capable of peaceful transitions. But I, through my personal experiences, have seen that's probably not going to happen. And whatever does happen is not going to be without bloodshed. And what does end up need to happen, English is hard, is we need to restructure our entire government. 100%. No one who is currently in office has any sort of long-term benefits for us. It's all just to keep their seat to keep power, to keep money. And the last major time that happened in history was France, with very similar issues. And what's interesting is that Friedrich Nietzsche, when he was talking about Napoleon, recognized those things during his time and realized those same issues were happening in his time. So, where's our Napoleon? Where was his Napoleon? Well, when I was going through all these things and I was watching this video, or watching Napoleon and deciding, I wanted to make a video on this and put myself out there, it's because I realized we are all men of history, right? There's another thing that I heard a long time ago, but reinforced recently, about how we are the progeny of winners. We are the progeny of success, right? I wouldn't be here today if I didn't come from a form of greatness. And think about that logically, right? How nature, nurture, how natural evolution happens. Do I look like a prime human specimen? Absolutely not. I can safely say I would not be here if it wasn't for technology. And that's not even because of me. It's because of one of my family, one of my parents. They would not be here if it wasn't for the benefits of technology that existed even back then. So I'm genetically, I guess you would say, recessive, because I shouldn't be here. A lot of us shouldn't be here. And I'm not even trying to make that a bigger thing than it is. I'm glad that there are people who would not have existed 100 years ago. They give us a new perception. They give us a new level of empathy. They give us that development, that reason to progress as a society so we can help those who are less fortunate. And we should. We should always be servants to them. That's neither here nor there. But if I think about it as I come from a successful barbarian or a small emperor of an island in the coast of somewhere, like who knows what my genealogy has, and I am a little bit more aware than most. I do know we have a bit of a family history on my father's side. So there is, some grounds to say that, my family has been more on the commander side of things throughout millennia. And again, you're probably like, well, who the fuck are you then? Why aren't you doing something? Well, that's a great question. Why aren't I doing anything? When do you start doing something? And this is all what clicked to me while I was watching this movie. We are men of history. Every day, history is being made. Every second we live, we are furthering a cause. A lot of it's very selfish, very personal. We are furthering the cause to make more money, to have more children, to have more things, more stuff, to have more power. But it's not the cause. It's a cause. And when I was in the military, I learned truly what it was to serve a cause. Not the cause, but something close to it. One of my favorite ways to describe what a veteran is I don't know if we founded this, but I used to work for Grunt Style. And the first time I ever saw this was on a Grunt Style shirt, which was a veteran is described as someone who wrote a blank check payable out up to and including their life for service of this country. Fucking love that definition, because I think that encompasses a lot of people who may not have served as long as they would have liked, may have gotten out under bad circumstances, or maybe even just got out after boot camp because of an injury or, couldn't hack it or whatever. But at least they fucking tried. At least they signed on. 50 years ago, you were forced. And because of how poorly trained our military was, a lot of people died who shouldn't have needed to die, who didn't need to die. But that's history. That's always what happened. You always had kings, empires, republics, democracies send wave after wave of us to die in service to this country. So, with that in mind, Napoleon used to get a lot of flack, especially after his embarrassment in Russia that led to his exile, of how many men he lost. And as a tactician, you kind of need to factor in your personnel is more logistic than human. And I get that. Again, I was in the military, I was lower enlisted. All right. Had I gone overseas, I'm sure I would have maybe really hated it, but I wrote my name on that blank check and said, if need be, it's payable up to and including my life. So, I'm at least coming from a mentality that, I was willing to die for, in all seriousness. I took that oath very seriously. And I took my oath as a hospital corpsman in the U.S. Navy even more seriously. That's an oath I even still follow to this day. Not that it's relevant, but, just something to also get out there. So, thinking about everything I just talked about, if we're so fascinated with an empire collapsing, and we're all waiting for one person or more commanders to come lead us, and we had a really good example not too far off from recent history in France, and we are men of history, and history repeats itself. When are we going to let history repeat itself? Again, I know what I'm willing to do. And I would like you to dig deep, think about it, ask yourself, mull it over. What are you willing to do? Because I don't see things getting better. You don't see things getting better. There are so many YouTube channels who have crept up since the pandemic. I had to catch myself there. Because as a medical professional, yes, I do believe the pandemic was something serious. As a person who witnessed a lot of things and has worked for the government and knows people who have a little bit more information on certain things than I do, I would use the word plandemic a little bit more often. But in a strictly professional sense, since the pandemic happened, we have seen an explosion of a depressive state. And not just because we're all locked in with ourselves and our thoughts. It's because there's something big on the horizon. Real big. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. And you know what scares me the fucking most? I don't think those in charge really know what's coming either. I think we look to history and we think of, for example, World War I is my favorite war in history for a lot of bad reasons. It was so decimating to society. It changed war. It was the first modern war. And World War II really overshadows it because it was such a cut and dry good versus bad. I can safely tell you World War III is not going to be cut and dry. I don't even think it's going to be like World War I, where it's just a bunch of powers all vying for imperialistic control. It's going to be a slugfest, and it's going to be winner take all. This is all in, show your fucking cards, and then we're having, one way or the other, a one world government. I don't think anybody really wants that. I'm going to fucking ruffle some feathers. I would like to see a world without borders. But do not get that mixed up with supporting a one world government. There are differences. And perhaps I will make a video elaborating those differences, but I want to get that very clear as well. Because I feel like I'm going to be jumping on both sides of this spectrum here throughout this video, and we're already long enough as it is. So, if we're all so scared, if we're all worried, if we all have so much to lose, how much more fear do you need? Where is the boundary? And I guess I'll end it with this, it's never too late to set a boundary. It's only too late to follow it. So if I say here and not farther, I got to fucking own up to that. I got to live that example. And that's why I said I know what I'm willing to do. Do I know the right people who are able to commit some of these changes? Commit to these changes, I should say. Is there a better system to put in place after we do something like that? I don't believe there is. But I think we are definitely smarter than a bunch of peasants from the late 1700s who could, barely read and write their own language. I think today we probably have a much better chance of developing a whole new structure of government in a modern world. So I don't think that fear should be holding us back. I think fear should be a motivator. And those who decide to prep, those who decide to disseminate information in the hope someone else will do it, and those that are selfish and keep themselves either in a closed community or even completely away from community are all doing an equal disservice. You're not acting. You're not acting. But if you draw a boundary line and you hold fast to that boundary, that's where it can start. And that's where I would like to meet other people, have a very nice civil discussion, and present these ideas onward. I don't know if it'll happen. I would like to think that there's a possibility that it could happen before this big thing on the horizon does turn out. I don't know if it will. But I've set my boundary. I've taken an action. This video for all the Fed boys waiting for some terroristic action to suddenly take place. And I recognize my role. Yes, commander. Me, I know. I'm a commander. I'm not a servant. And I realize it's all history. One day I'm going to die. Kind of hope it's sooner rather than later, to be honest. Mental health hasn't been where it used to be. There you go. I just set the template for the Fed boys, right? Those who know me, you already know what's going on. Those who don't know me, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So, let history show what's going to come. Let's be optimistic. Let's set that boundary. Hold fast to that ideal. Realize our role. And get to point D. Thank you very much if you watched all this. Don't expect further content on something like this, at least on this channel. This is not what this is for, but it's where I felt the most comfortable placing it. Stay safe out there.